Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Inventory Management, ABC Analysis, and EOQ. My name is Ernesto Perez. I'll be your host today, and we are joined by our presenter, Luis Echevarria. Before we continue, there are just a couple of logistical items I would like to mention to optimize your experience on today's event. We'll have time at the end of today's session to answer any question, but please submit them at any time. So you have a Q panel on the right side of your screen, and you can submit your questions there. Thank you for your time and interest, and with no further ado, I leave you with Luis.
Thank you, Ernesto. Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar. Like Ernesto said, today we're talking about inventory management, and specifically in inventory management, we're looking at the ABC analysis and the EOQ, economic order quantity tools that are present within EAM, and how can we use them, and how will that benefit you, right, in terms of using them, right, and see the actual logistics that and all the parameters needed in order to make use of it. Okay, so for today's agenda, first we're gonna be looking at the ABC analysis tool, basically general information about it. Then basically we go into the actual system. We're gonna look at it and see the actual screens of EAM in terms of how would that be used. From there, we kind of jump into the actual economic order quantity and how basically that ties into that ABC analysis. Okay? And again, the actual way to use it through the Infor EAM software. And lastly, we'll go through the actual questions that you may have and try to answer them as possible. Okay, so let's go into the actual ABC analysis. Okay, so ABC analysis typically a tool in controlling and managing your actual inventory itself. Okay, what is within EAM? Well, the system will help you out, right, in order to classify your inventory items and then try to put them within a 3-tier scale. We will have class A parts, we're gonna have class B parts, and class C parts. Class A parts are basically, they must make up the upper level of all your inventory, right? Basically, class A parts are the most expensive ones that you have in your inventory. Class B will be right in the middle of the levels of your inventory. Those are practically not so expensive, but you have some usage of it. Okay? And then lastly, it's class C, which will range in the lowest level of that of your inventory itself. Okay. Typically, ABC analysis can be used, right, through either looking at the total inventory value or basically on the usage value, right? So how are you using your parts against work orders, and how the system will look at those and tell you, well, based on your usage, this can be classified as a class A, or based on your total inventory value, this can be classified as a class B part, right? So you're gonna see both of those in the mix, okay? So all of these tool of ABC analysis typically will help managing that inventory, okay? It will help you out in the stock replenishment so that you can get a sense of what is it that we need to replenish and have them available in your inventory items, okay? Also, when you're doing your physical counts. So typically by using these classes of ABC, well, you will basically going to try to, well, typically you're going to try to do some stock counts against your expensive ones, right? The ones that typically will have the highest value within all the inventory, because you want to keep track of those, make sure you don't lose any of those in there. Okay. Additionally, you will also this will also help you in your repairable spares management. Those items that are do in fact an actual asset in your system, and why do you need them, the availability of them, and make sure that they are available on time. Okay. Also, in terms of the start purchasing decisions, right? We will also look at, or this will also support your part priority scheme, right? So basically, high value with high lead time in terms of those inventory, we'll need to prioritize those to make them available, right? So in the sense that ABC analysis helps you classify that out, okay? Moving forward, let's look at over here, okay? So typically on your ABC analysis setup, well, the typical thing to do is to practically define these cutoff percentage values, right? These will, again, will summarize as 100% of your whole inventory. And then out of those percentage values, based on either the actual value of the items or the actual usage value of those items, the system will use those in there so that it can be classified within class A percentage or class B or class C. Okay. And then that analysis will be again based on the part value, which is basically your quantity available times the actual average price of that item. The other one is based on a part usage value, which is go looking at how you're issuing, right? How you issue those parts against work orders and the actual average price of those, so that you can get a sense of how you're using them, which should be uh, considered a class A or a class B or a class C. So what is it, or how we can use, well, basically how we can use ABC analysis, right? The usefulness of it. So in terms of the ABC analysis, again, it's a tool to manage your inventory, to control it, to make sure that you have the correct amount of items in there for your jobs that are currently in process of executing or they are going to be executed in the near future, right? So in terms of that ABC analysis, well, basically we can use them in the purchasing part of the whole of the inventory, right? So basically we can design approval levels based on that ABC class, so that high priority ones, items that are very expensive, will then necessarily go to a specific person to get approval. The other ones could go through a different level of approval based on the value. So that also, the system can be configured in a sense so that it can provide those approval levels accordingly. Also for the physical inventory, right? The cycle counts and all of that. Well, basically you can determine your based on those ABC classes. You might want to count your items with a class A on a weekly or a daily basis, or the items in class B, you can do them on a monthly basis, or C, because they're so inexpensive, they're not part of the, let's say they are part of the lowest level of your inventory. All those can be seen either semi-annually or annually, right? So that's one way to use that ABC analysis and integrate it into typical operations within the inventory. Again, also for forecasting, for example, you can classify your items by using an ABC class A or a class B or a class C, right? So that the necessary people are in a room and they can go into an actual resolution of what is it that we need to buy or and how much of these based on that classification, right? So for example, forecast A item, class A items with a committee, right? Because they're very important, they're expensive, they're items that really move thoroughly on your inventory, right? Or you can use some kind of a projection, trend projection for class B items, right? Or basically the buyer can say, well, I typically could buy them probably two of these every 4 months, so they can use their guessing in terms of forecasting of things I need to buy, right? So again, that also reflects the approval levels, right? What is it that we want to incorporate specific people in the process of generating these requisitions by using this ABC class. So let's see those in action. So I'm gonna move into Infor EAM and probably show you around, and so you can look at what is out there. Okay. So let me just pull up Infor EAM, right? So we have a demo environment over here. I will gonna go through a couple of places within Infor EAM just to show you around some screens where we can typically find information regarding those specifically with the ABC analysis. Okay. So let's go into materials, let's go into parts, and let's look for an item itself, right? So I'm gonna look for this valve over here. Typically in your record view, you might not see most of that. The ABC will generally be found in the store tab over here, okay? So for example, I'm gonna click on this one. This item is on warehouse 01. I have already a preferred supplier attached to it. I have some minimum, some maximum amounts in there. If you look at this, the system, when you kind of go through the process of doing your ABC analysis, well, basically, it's going to look and probably update you based on this selection over here, this class over here, right? Typically, as you create and you monitor your actual inventory, you can input these values over here manually, right? But the idea is to generate process in which you kind of go through the actual different screens in order to pull the information that you want to include into that ABC analysis, and then the system will try to project that that value in there, right? That what's supposed to be that ABC class for that item on that specific warehouse. Okay. So I'm gonna move and I'm gonna go into the actual ABC analysis, right? So I'm gonna go into materials, I'm gonna go into process, and I'm going to generate my ABC analysis. Okay. Again, like every single screen in EAM, we have basically our parameters, right? And these are the cutoff points, right? So I'm looking at standard, right? This is how typically the system will look at this. For example, cutoff point A will be for the class A, and then this one over here, the class B. So it's saying that 70% out of my total inventory will be considered part of that ABC class, okay? And then that 20% is gonna be related to that B class, and so on. The 10% will be related to that C class. So, and that's how the system will kind of look at your quantities and your values, and then probably assign them based on that within one of these cutoff points, right? Anything that is between the 70 and the 90% will be considered a B class. Anything between the 90 and the 100% will be considered C class, right? So typically A, the most, let's say the ones that you have much value within the actual inventory. The B ones are within the mid layer of that, and then the C class, it's basically the lowest level. Okay. You can typically use this for one single store, or you can just leave it in blank and use it for every single store, okay, available. So it's going to include everything that is within that range of warehouses within the EAM, okay? And then over here, you have the ABC analysis type, either by usage base, and you're going to see it's going to ask you for a range of dates. So within that range of date, the system will look for basically the average consumption of an item, and then it will also look for that price attached to that issue. Okay? So in a sense, gives you that ABC analysis based on that consumption that you're doing within 1 year. Okay, so it's typically 1 year back in terms of the data to be used for. Okay. Right. The other one option is value-based. So if we go over here and click value-based, typically the system will look at the actual quantity, the current quantity that you have in inventory for your items, and then the average price into that. And then using that calculation, it's going to try to put it in within one of these ranges or cutoff points. Okay. So let's go and look at this as a value base so we can see in action, right? So we're going to click the process button over here, right? So it's going to look for every single item. In this case, I use all of the warehouses that are available within that organization. So it's going to pull almost everything in there, right? So you're going to see items, you're going to see current price type for that item specifically, the average price, the current quantity, and the total value of it, right? So this is where practically everything comes up, right? In terms of how to classify these items within a specific percentage, right? So if you see over here, this item over here, which has a price of 342 and a quantity of 54, gives us a value of 18,471, right? And that represents like 42% of your entire inventory, right? So each of these, the system calculates, right? And puts it in order of descent, right? In terms of that percentage value, right? On the right side of that column, you're gonna see the actual cumulative percentage, right? So over here, for example, we have 42 plus a 9 gives us a 52, right? And so on. So the system keeps adding into this, right? Until it reaches a specific point, that cutoff point that you defined initially, okay? So if you look at this, for example, we said that 70% of your inventory should be within that class A over here, right? So if you see over here, when we look at this line that it's in here, it's going to give us a cumulative value percentage of 69.42, right? So it's not a typical 70, but it's within that range, right? So the next one, already 4.87% of the value of the inventory, and then a cumulative value of 74. If you see, that item also has been classified as an A, right? So that in a sense, the system since it is within, it starts that value before it reaches that cutoff point, then the system actually adds it into that ABC class A over here, right? Now the next one, it's way over that 70% cutoff point, right? So it's 78 over here, right? And so on. So the system will keep going at this until it reaches again that next cutoff point, which is the 90%, which includes the 70% of the class A and the 20% of the class B, right? So for example, over here, with this 2.78, the system reaches 90.78%. So it starts before that cutoff point, so it is included within that ABC class, okay? And so on. So the next level, or let's say the last items that you're gonna see over here are more for the actual C level or C class for your inventory, which are items that either you don't have that much of a value, right? Or at least there's nothing more of those available within the system, right? So all of these 0% means no quantity available except for this one over here, right? So once you go into that, basically the system will pre-populate you that ABC class over here. Okay? Now, this is not written in stone. Probably you might find that there's a couple of things based on experience, based on usage, based on your knowledge, that you might classify them a little bit different, right? So you still have that option, right? In a sense of how to manage this out. So anything that you have over here, you can either unselect anything and then just select the things that you might want to update in the system, right? So for example, I'm not gonna include that A because for some reason I do think that it's a B class based on the information that I have present. So I'm not gonna select that in terms to update, right? So once you define the things that you want the system to update automatically, then you click that update ABC class, and then the system either was going to tell you that it's good to go, it's updated, or for some reason you found some type of an error and didn't move forward. Right? So that's how you, once the system generates you the options, then if you look at those items, for example, I'm just going to look for all A, for example, over here, I have my value, so I classify it as an A. So you see, it automatically updated that in there. If I look for my part A, I think it was, it still has its C class over here because I did not update it accordingly, right? So you still have that option available in terms of managing that out. Okay, so that's the typical process of going through. And the people that work directly with inventory, they're going to look at this, and probably they're going to look at a starting point in order to manage your inventory, right? There's many ways to do that, but the system already has something already embedded within the actual tool itself that can help you start a process of managing and controlling one way, right, with one methodology of it. So again, if we go back over here and go to generate ABC analysis, and just for the fun of it, I'm just going to put this time by the usage base, and I'm just going to click process. If we saw before, we had tons of ABC class of A. See now how the system gives you the information related to these classes over here, right? So initially, that part A, the system considered it as a class A ABC analysis. Okay. The thing is, if we look at it on the usage side, now the system considers that as a bid, right? So it takes the quantity, the average quantity issued on a yearly basis, right? And looks at the average price for that, and then gives you some total value. And then based on that, it calculates against that percentage value and then accumulates that in order to look for the items that are your class A, your class B, and your class C. So you're going to see a difference between how the system calculates based on inventory value and how the system uses to classify based on usage value. Okay. Again, once you are fine with this, the things that you want to update, you just mark them and the system updates it automatically. Okay. Now, we have this over here, right? But we can do this analysis, but how can we use this forward, right? So one idea, one aspect of that is looking at the actual EOQ or economic order quantity, right? So going back over here, the economic order quantity, right? It's a calculated quantity that, like here it says, specifies, right? It's like the ideal balance, right? What should be my ideal value that I need to order based on a couple of variables, right? Based on the demand, based on an order cost, and based on a holding cost, plus the actual average price of that item, okay? So in a sense, it uses all of these typical variables when you're dealing with an inventory item and trying to figure out that economic order quantity, that real, or let's say that quantity that really represents the amount that I should be ordering based on my usage or my demand and based on those ordering or holding costs, right? So the demand for itself is really the quantity that was issued on a specific date range. It can be a week, a month, it can be 6 months, it can be anything that you typically hold on and look at the history of how you're issuing and ordering those items, and the system will try to gather that information out in order to assimilate and let you know what is it your demand, what is it that the items that you need in there based on that consumption. Okay, the order cost typically it's a manual input value and it's related on the execution of that order transaction. For example, your shipping, your handling cost, right? All of that it's embedded in some way, not explicitly, but implicitly into a transaction that you are actually ordering an item from a supplier. Okay, and then also that holding cost, which is another manually entered value representing that cost of storing that item, having that item in your inventory, having it there, how much does it cost in terms of just having it in there in your inventory, typically, okay? So again, that cost really relates with the average price of the item itself, okay? A couple of things that we have to keep in mind when we're dealing with the economic order quantity, okay? And that is some assumptions, and these are general assumptions in order to use the value correctly, okay? So for example, the calculation is applicable to a single product or item, right? Because it's looking at that item specifically. For instance, you know that the demand rate of that item, and it has to be known and it has to be constant. It's something that as you're managing your inventory, you must know exactly that demand rate of the item. So, okay. The item is purchased in orders in a single delivery, right? So it's nothing that you kind of back order in there and have some orders coming in as you typically are looking for them, right? And expecting them out in the system. It looks at the lead time, has to be known and constant. That it's something very specific about it. The holding cost, right? It's a percentage based on the average price. So, for example, an item that costs I don't know, maybe 100, an average part price of 100. Probably you might look at that as a 5% holding cost, having that item just sitting in your inventory with no actual movement of it. Okay? We have also the ordering and the setup costs are constant, right? So for example, you know that bringing that item is going to cost you some shipping and some handling, right? And some custom charges, for example. That can happen, but you know that those values are constant, right? Right. It also takes into consideration there's no back orders, right? Typically, you're buying things because you are needing them and they are available, and basically you are ordering the full thing, not something back ordered in there. And then also you have no quantity discounts, right? So for example, if you buy 1,000 of them, the supplier might take you out a 5% discount of it. So it's looking that it doesn't have that, because that affects the actual, let's say, the value that the system is calculating for that economic order quantity. Okay. So for example, for manufacturers, typically holding costs often represents around 20% based on the operating budget. That can change based on the industry, right? Typical wholesalers and retailers, those values really adds up, right? They're much higher because they're kind of buying more and more, and they're selling more of those items in there. Okay? So if you manage carefully your inventory, that will practically gives you some value rather, right, in terms of additional benefits in cost reductions and all of that. So useful, right? So we can select all the warehouses within Infor EAM setup. We can look those as individual parts or as classes of parts, right? For example, I'm looking at pumps, specific types of pumps. Well, I can use that class in order to pull information related to what that specific trade of it. Okay? You can also use classes of stock, right? And just like we were looking at economic order quantity, can use that ABC class, right? So you can typically manage, let's say, that economic order quantity for a specific ABC class. So let's see those in action again. I'm gonna move into Infor EAM just to show you around a couple of places, right? Right. So again, if we move into the actual item itself, and over here we have our order quantities. This is basically the value that the system is trying to calculate for you, giving you that option and saying, yes, I'm looking for that item, I'm looking for that part, and I want to know exactly, based on my usage, what will be my new order quantity. Okay. It's looking at, like the system cell, lead times, right? ABC class or specific stock class, for example, or an actual classification of the item itself, right? That's over here, right? So in a sense, those are typical parameters that you can use in order to, let's say, filter out the information that you want to include into that economic order quantity, okay, calculation. So let's go in and let's figure out this economic order quantity and how typically it can be run on. Okay. So let's go and look for materials, process, and let's say calculate EOQ. Okay. And these are your parameters within EAM, okay, that the system is looking at. So we have a date range important because that's how the system will look for how you're issuing things out. Yeah, those values, those average issued quantities that you have done so far on a specific time frame. Okay. It also looks at the values for so it looks like for those values specifically for the system itself. So 1 second while I kind of head over here. I'm looking for my Infor EAM process over here. All right. Okay. So in a sense, looks at your ABC class. That's one option in order to use the system in order to calculate that economic order quantity. We have stock class, like we said, we can specifically for one item, or it can be specifically for one warehouse or include every single warehouse in there. In this case, we're just going to go into the actual ABC class. So we're gonna select the ABC class A. So remember that the past option that we did on the ABC analysis was to classify that inventory as either a class A, a class B, or a class C, okay? So again, over here, I selected that out. I put my holding cost calculation type as an average percentage, right? And I'm saying that 20% it's my holding cost. So it's cost me 20% just of my inventory value to hold that that item in there, okay? And then on my ordering cost, this is a fixed value in which you can typically put in manually, and that relates to the way that you're handling the information, right? Or handling the actual item, the shipping cost, anything related to that ordering process of it. So I'm gonna put as a specific value as a 10 over here, just to get going into the other, to the next part of the process, right? So once I have those figured out there, I click on the process button, okay? And the system will bring out values or anything that is within that specific range that I have issued so far that is a class A and it's within that year date range that I selected. Okay, in this case, it brings me one item. I have used this item, and based on that, right now the system tells us that it's current order quantity, which is the actual value that you have on your store tab on the part screen, saying that you typically have a 2 over here, right? And that's how the system is interpreting, right? And then over here, it has an EOQ of 1.32. This is the calculated value of that economic order quantity, okay? Using that demand, those holding costs, and also those ordering costs in the mix, right? So it's gonna give you what is the quantity demanded within that specific range, okay, and that average price of it, okay, and how many purchases you have done for that specific item in a year, right? So the system calculates all of these, right? It brings out the information in there so that you can definitely look at that in the sense of, I'm sure that I want to order two, right? There's another part in there that really adds up, which is your experience with the inventory. No one knows better the inventory than the actual user that it's managing in it, right? So in a sense, the system will give you that opportunity. Then it's going to present you values based on um, your current experience or current usage of the items in the inventory. But it's up to you if you want to stick, for example, with that two or update it to a three, because you might say that based on your experience, typically, yeah, that number should be a little bit more. Probably there are some issues that have not been um, input into the system that are not being counted for. So that gives you that option if you need to change that value in there or not, right? So in a sense, I'm just going to leave it over here. Once you look at these and you agree with that and you update your quantities, then the system automatically will move and update the values in your ordering method, right? If you're using the min-max or the reorder level, the system will adjust the order quantity based on that usage. Okay. So once you click on that, let me just select the line, right? Because I have to select it over here. And I update that out, and the system will, once it's gone, it's saying that, yeah, it was updated accordingly. Okay. So I'll go back over here and look for that 00104 valve over here, and then go to the store tab. That value that I updated is going to be present over here. It's going to be updated accordingly, right? So for example, I switch it to a 3, and we have the system updates that order quantity in there. And that's how you typically are using the economic order quantity within Infor EAM. Okay. Let's go back over here and let me just pull up again my PowerPoint presentation. Okay, and with that, I'm leaving you for questions that you may have around this. Hello? Ernesto, are you in there?
Hey, sorry, I was answering a question here. So the question that I got was, and I'm not sure if you have the answer, but I was doing a little bit of research on that, is up to what version does the ABC analysis is available, right? And I was doing some research on that one, and it goes all the way up, all the way back to 8.5. So
yeah, I think it goes a little bit further into 8.3 version. This is basically one of these tools within EAM that it's been there all the time in there. So you're gonna find that probably 8.3 or 8.2 version should be available in there in terms of a tool like these to manage your inventory.
okay, yeah, I think it's one of those that hasn't been used too much, but it's a very powerful tool.
Yeah. Typically, it's a very powerful tool for, let's say, for people that are starting to manage out their inventory, or they don't have a specific way to manage it, right? this is kind of these items that you, or tools within EAM that you can use to start with something, right? To start something up in the managing process of that inventory and start figuring out values on a general basis, right? It won't be as specific as as there are other methodologies that you can use in which they're very, very specific, they're very statistical and all of that. But this gives you a general sense to start managing that inventory in a way that you can typically at least get going with some values and present some information and start validating that with what your current usage is.
Right. So it goes all, it doesn't go all the way and take you home and save you millions of dollars, right? But it gives you the best starting point from where you are to where you want to get, right?
Correct, correct. So that is why we typically emphasize in what are your classes of your inventory. Because based on those classes, then you can do some ABC analysis with that, and that will give you some more data to go at it and start looking at your inventory in a different way.
Okay. And how about I saw that you do the ABC analysis for a specific for all history, right? But what if I want to see maybe last year's performance on the inventory? Is that possible?
Yeah, yeah. Typically, for those aspects, you will need to select a date range, right? In this case, when we did the preview over here, we selected 1 year back, right? But you can definitely go as much as you would like to. For example, 2 or 3 years. It depends on the way that you're selecting and running that ABC analysis. But as long as you add more time into this, remember the data that it's amounting into the actual process will be higher, right? And gives you probably is going to give you a better overall estimate either on an ABC class or an economic order quantity because you're looking more at the entire history of how you're using and issuing those items into a work order, right? So it's looking at those specific values for a longer period of time, which in a sense gives you a more specific number, right? More realistic number in terms of your ABC classes or economic order quantities.
Right. And probably that's why it's not a tool that is it's one of the most exploited tools in EAM, right? It's not something that you dive in daily and check the ABC analysis daily, right? You have to let history run, transactions run throughout maybe a year or two to take a little bit of information and be able to make sense out of it.
Correct, correct. You definitely need to let things flow in. You need to start getting that history in there so that the system can get some data in there into that analysis and give you a more realistic value. So definitely, this is not ABC analysis. It's not something that you typically do like every single week, right? This is something that you typically will do on a monthly basis or probably on a quarter basis based on your on how you issue things out in your inventory, right? And how you're using it. So in a sense, the economic order quantity might change, but again, I think these two things are tied up because by looking at your ABC classes, right, then you can focus on the ones that are actually high value ones, and from those basically select the ones and look at the order quantity. Am I ordering correctly? Can I reduce my inventory because I'm ordering 6 and should be 4, right? At some point, that will make sense and give you some cost reduction in there, which typically people like reduction of the reductions in cost, right? They typically would like to have as much as they can gain with the least cost available. So in the sense, at some point, starts giving that aspect and those values in there.
So for example, a good scenario for this would be, let's say you want to try and implement EOQ throughout a year and do a trial and validate if the ABC analysis actually changes based on that information, right? You can, that would be a good scenario for it, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Okay, so if there are any other questions, then we can call it a day today. Feel free to ask us any questions on to our email info@visualk.com, and you can and we will get back to you with any answers that you need. You can also contact Luis Echevarria directly and ask him about the questions. And also you can visit our website and have more information there. So let us know if you have any questions and reach out to us. So, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Luis, thank you very much for your time. And thank you everyone for assisting and giving us a little bit of your time as well. So that's it, and happy weekend.
All right. Thank you, everyone.